Good morning, good morning. This is Brother from the Third Stone. How's everybody? I'm going to play for you something from MSNBC, and I found this kind of important and also interesting. Let's get into it.
There is the new formation today of a unity government. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu partnering with one of the opposition figures who was actually seen as his potential alternative, defense veteran Benny Gantz. And that is a plan, a unity government here that's supposed to go for the duration of the conflict. As I mentioned, if you think about it at a simple level compared to America, that's not something that the United States had happen between politicians, say, over Iraq or during Vietnam. They also convened an emergency war cabinet amidst this possible ground incursion. Now, some analysts also note this new move today may also reflect a type of internal or political weakness for Netanyahu, who faces withering criticism since Hamas rampaged through those Israeli towns, as the Washington Post reports, and that the idea began with not Netanyahu, but that opposition politician I just mentioned, Gantz, who had immediately called for a unity government to be formed, and Netanyahu may have felt he had little choice as public support for the idea grew over the next 4 days. So this development reinforces a point that a lot of people have made. There is diversity in a broad range of views within Israeli society, just as there is within Palestinian society. Debates about how to govern, and certainly about what to do regarding these foreign policy rifts for both societies. Netanyahu's approach to both governing and the peace process has been very controversial for a long time inside Israel and within Israeli civic and political life. And both sides of this conflict, as I mentioned, have seen foreign policy decisions or inaction define people's lives, safety, and domestic politics for some time. So Israel's first focus right now, we can clearly see, is this emergency security challenge and the war itself. But Israelis are also concerned, according to what they say and accounts that we have, about the government's intelligence failure and the potential misallocation of military resources and a so-called level of political chaos spurred, Netanyahu's critics say, by his policies and judicial crackdown. Some argue within Israel that that has also undercut the cohesion of the country's well-known and, quote, powerful military, according to a breakdown there in the Associated Press. Now, all of those forces, of course, are working on a response to what is the single highest death toll from an attack since Israel's founding in one attack. And they're girding for the kind of war that could, again, upend everything for both of these societies and for the region with, let's be clear, based on what we're hearing and seeing, no apparent off-ramp, certainly no ceasefire on the table for some time. I mentioned the peace process and the history, which is part of our special coverage tonight. Veteran Middle East peace negotiator Dennis Ross, who also helped create the Oslo Accords, has previously warned that the breakdown of a real durable peace process actually feeds a dangerous status quo, where you have the occasional ceasefire punctuated by terrible terrorism and violence.
What comes next? If all we do is go back to the status quo ante, we're just basically biding time until this happens again. So I think there needs to be a strategy not only for a ceasefire, I think there needs to be a strategy for what comes next.
That was about 2 years ago. Ross has much experience here. We quoted him earlier in our coverage this week. He was a special envoy in Oslo, where Israel and the PLO reached that deal. And you can see him there near President Clinton. He served as a diplomat and peace negotiator throughout that Clinton administration, as well as in the State Department under President Bush. There he is there with some of the principals, and you can see a younger Netanyahu. And Ross also served in the Obama administration. This week, Politico stated that, quote, no American diplomat is more familiar with the history of enmity between Israelis and Palestinians, perhaps, than Ambassador Ross. Ambassador Dennis Ross is our special guest tonight for an extended discussion of these issues. Thank you for being here.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Tough time for everyone, as we've taken care to emphasize. You know a lot of these people. You've been through this, as I said, so viewers understand you were someone at the table with both sides, trying to get somewhere with progress for both societies, as I put it. So when you talked about the fact that ceasefires and the stalemate would never really quiet down, what did you mean, and do you tragically see this as one of those outcomes?
Look, I do, and I think I didn't remember that I'd been on with you saying that 2 years ago, but I was concerned at the time if there wasn't something done that was more fundamental as it related to a demilitarization of Gaza, marrying it to a condition of reconstruction. We will do reconstruction, massive reconstruction, but there has to be a mechanism that guarantees demilitarization, or my concern then, and it remains, we're going to see this all over again. Now, I will say this. Israelis have had a paradigm since 2009 vis-a-vis Hamas. There was a significant conflict then. There was another one in 2012, another one in 2014, 2021, which we were just talking about. Every time there was a ceasefire that was negotiated, Hamas used that to rebuild and prepare itself for the next round. Israelis, since that time, basically felt they had found a model. They felt that model was one in which they could coexist with Hamas, they would manage these periodic conflicts, and it was less expensive to manage these periodic conflicts than it was to go back into Gaza. They had left Gaza in 2005, 100%. One of the interesting things that people forget, the first 6 months after Israel left Gaza, 100%, Hamas attacked the crossing points from Israel into Gaza. There were 6 crossing points. They moved people and goods in and out. They served Palestinian interests. They weren't in favor of Israel. And Hamas attacked those crossing points. And as a result, Israel reduced the number of crossing points from 6 to 2. So Israel came up with what it thought was, okay, we can manage this, and it's less expensive than having to go back into Gaza. Now, the problem is what we've now seen shattered all those illusions. The price that has been paid, the reality that Hamas acted just like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I mean, the scenes we have seen over the last few days are incomprehensible. How do you kidnap women in wheelchairs and take them back to Gaza? How do you decapitate babies in front of their parents? There wasn't a shred of humanity. This is exactly the kind of behavior that we saw from ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, within Israel, from left to right, and we now have a national unity government, from Israel, from left to right, there is an absolute conviction that once and for all, we have to remove the threat that Hamas poses to us, and we're not going to live with it any longer. So that paradigm of coexisting and managing the conflict, that's now over from an Israeli standpoint.
And so was that a foreseeable or even intended objective of Hamas in what is now happening?
I think that Hamas has miscalculated because they grabbed the hostages, anticipating that, okay, the way we will deter Israel from coming and doing that is by holding these hostages, because we see how sensitive Israel has been historically to holding the hostages. Prime Minister Netanyahu traded over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including many who were responsible for bombings in Israel, a lot of blood on their hands, for one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. So the Hamas mindset was, we know their sensitivity to hostages, so we'll hold them, that'll deter the Israelis, and we'll emerge with a great victory. That was the Hamas mindset, but I think they fundamentally miscalculated.
Right, and as you say, and you remind people, the horrific math, the ratio on that is something where they have achieved, however you want to call it, objectively, tactically, those kind of trades before. They've even gotten some of their current leadership who are now hiding underground, actually were partly released through those kind of deals. So as you say, very close to home. I want you to stay with me. I'm going to show something with regard to again, we emphasize the history because there's a lot here, but you've certainly been at the table and you have been relied on by leadership of the United States in both parties to try to reach peace deals. Some have worked, some clearly, as you know and have said, have not. I want to show again, for our context tonight, 1993, the signing of that first Oslo Accord. Take a look.
The Prime Minister of Israel and the chairman of the PLO, who have spent most of their lives trying to destroy each other, here on a common platform at the White House, speaking of peace.
A handshake between two men who have been bitter enemies for decades.
If the spirit that prevailed here today can be extended, finally, there is hope for peace in a place where there has been war almost without end.
hope for peace, the discussion then about an interim agreement. And I want to show now from 1995 what then Ambassador Ross said.
Those who are here want to deepen the process of peace, expand the process of peace, and build on it in a way that makes it more enduring and stable, and ultimately will lead to what I said, which is a comprehensive peace settlement.
The big question then, sir, what did work out of that, and what didn't? And what do you say to the concern inside Israel and from some of its allies in the United States that you and that government were sitting at the table with Palestinian leadership that were willing to make more of a deal than certainly, I say this with quite obviousness, Hamas as a force today?
A number of things I would say. That initial breakthrough was psychologically extraordinary because the PLO denied the existence of Israel and rejected it. Israel denied the existence of the PLO and rejected it. You had an existential conflict between two national movements competing for the same space. Suddenly, when you had a mutual recognition, you were saying what was an existential conflict could be turned into a political conflict.
I'll read a version of what you said, quote, "The main reason this Hamas attack is happening now is because of the prospect of the U.S.-Saudi-Israel deal. Hamas understands this is a huge transformative event, and they're trying to create a circumstance where it'll be difficult for Saudi Arabia to do it right," end quote. Given your extensive experience, as noted at the table, including trying to broker agreements with Palestinian leadership, what exactly do you mean by that? And are you positing that Hamas, with its brutality and terrorism, is trying to do something that would undercut or hurt potentially what's in the interest of at least some other elements of the society and the population in the territories?
I think there are two factors here. One of the things that Hamas understands, if the custodian of the two holy mosques, meaning Saudi Arabia, the leader of Saudi Arabia, the most important Sunni leader, 85% of all Muslims are Sunni, the most important Sunni leader makes peace with the nation state of the Jewish people, you're taking a significant religious element out of this conflict, or at least you're greatly reducing it. Hamas needs to keep this a religious conflict. When you're talking about a religious conflict, there's no compromise. When you turn it into a national conflict, you're able to find ways to compromise and end it. So on the one hand, Saudi Arabia breaking through with Israel is an enormous transformative move psychologically and even religiously. On the other, you create a network of states tied to Saudi Arabia and Israel. These are countries that are advancing economies, digitally based, building for the 21st century, capable of coping with the challenges that food security, water security, health security, cyber security, all the things related to what we're seeing when they range from climate to health. These are societies that want to be resilient and successful. And the contrast of these societies with Iran, with Syria, with Lebanon, where Hezbollah is, where Hamas is, they represent only oppression and failure. They offer nothing for their publics. Creating what is a very successful alternative is the worst thing in the world for them. It further alienates their own public. It makes it harder for them to maintain their control. So they saw this as the Iranians saw it as a real threat.
Understood. And that's so important. I'm jumping in because we've put aside the time. But my last question to you is about another facet of this. There are those who are concerned or critically raising the issue that if Israel under Netanyahu and this unity government goes forward with a major and sustained attack on Gaza that involves heavy civilian casualties, that, however much they say is a security decision at this point, also sets back everything that you've been working on and talking about. What do you say to that? What does it mean, in your view, to have a proportionate response to what you earlier condemned, the barbarism and the terrorism?
I guess I'd make a couple of points. First, I don't know what proportionality is when you're looking at people who come in and decapitate babies and mow down civilians and make it clear that violence will always be their tool. I don't know what proportionality is when it comes to that, number one. Number two, there is going to be an unfolding tragedy in Gaza. We already see it, but Hamas is the one that produces. They bear responsibility. and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Number three, were Hamas to win coming out of this, then the whole rejectionist ideology that they represent, this coalition of what the Iranians like to call the coalition resistance, this coalition would gain enormous momentum from an ideological standpoint. The ability to say, our way works, you see, don't go the way of those who are prepared to negotiate and make peace. We need to have Hamas seen as losing. The price here is terrible, by the way. The price for the Israelis will be terrible as well. But we cannot have an outcome where Hamas looks like they were successful and they can do this again, because it will have its reverberations throughout the region for a long time to come. And the possibility of breakthroughs then will disappear. And I think right now, that's not the case. I think that we can come out of this in a way where Hamas has been fully discredited. It's what it stands for has been discredited. And those who want a different future will have a real potential. I wouldn't write off a breakthrough in Saudi Arabia sometime when this is over, but certainly right now, I think it's on hold.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, tell me what you think about this clip. And let me know in the comments section. And thanks again for bearing with me and listening to MSNBC. And this is Brother from the Third Stone. Peace and blessings.